Joining the panel now is Liberal MP Keith Wolahan, who also served on 3 tours of Afghanistan. Appreciate your time today. What have you made of the government's response? This started under the coalition and obviously the final response from Labor today.
I was in the chamber today when the Minister of Defence announced the closing of an important chapter that began with the announcement by the Chief of Defence Force in a press release on the 19th of November 2020. So this is almost 4 years later, for many incidents that occurred over a decade ago. So there's a huge amount of time involved. But this is an important step today where it's the closure of a particular chapter from the Brereton report, which includes command responsibility. And so I sat in the chamber, I saw the Minister for Defence give his presentation, and also the Shadow Minister for Defence and my good friend Andrew Hastie, who was also a commander in Afghanistan, like I was. So this was more than just politics today, that this was personal for us.
In terms of some of the arguments broadly out there around fog of war, this was obviously a very difficult environment, and I'm speaking just looking on. I can't imagine what it's like. It's one of those wars where it was difficult at times to differentiate between a civilian and an enemy. But even that being so, the allegations here go way beyond sort of legitimate confusion. Is that important to emphasise, that for the small number of people that these allegations have been against, this goes way beyond any sort of fog of war claims?
There's 2 points to make. The first is that the decision on medals, this isn't about criminal accountability. No one is suggesting that those commanders knew or involved in the criminal acts. But when you go to the Brereton report, remember that Justice Paul Brereton, drew a line under combat incidents and those that were not in combat. So the most egregious incidents involve the execution of prisoners away from the heat of combat. So the fog of war is a real thing. It leads to confusion and human emotions where your heart rate is elevated, your breathing is deep and your mouth is dry and your brain narrows in on a particular incident. It's probably something we've all experienced in different circumstances, but in war it is really acute. None of these incidents happened in those circumstances, and that's why it was important that we had the report.
Why shouldn't we know who's had their medals stripped off them?
For 2 reasons. We have a Privacy Act and we have a Privacy Act obligation. So if we have questions about that, we should look at the way the Act operates. The second is that for those that are still serving in Special Operations Command, they do have protected identity. Now, that's not a blanket ban over never knowing who your name is, and we've seen one former soldier, his name, who has been released because he is being charged in a criminal court for war crimes. But I think we don't need to know. We don't need to know because the accountability at that level, and I'm assuming it was either at the level myself and Andrew Hastie were at the troop platoon level, the company level, which is immediately above, or the commanding officer level. That's my assumption, is that where they are in that band. But the one criticism we do have of this process is that that responsibility goes all the way up, not just for those who were in the command in the field, in Kandahar and in Helmand and in Uruzgan, but those who are in headquarters in Dubai, those who are in headquarters here. So we should be consistent on accountability all the way up.
So Angus Campbell, what's your view on him escaping all this?
Well, I don't want to single out individuals, but let me speak in general principles. The awards that we're talking about were given for distinguished command and leadership or distinguished leadership. I've been a leader in combat. You do get all of the glory of the good work and courage that your soldiers do, but the flip side of that is that you also have some moral accountability for when things go wrong. And we're not talking about saying that Angus Campbell or others are directly responsible for this. We're saying that should you wear a medal that says you had distinguished command and leadership, even if things happened that you didn't know about? And I think there's an obvious answer to that, and I think that's what this process was about. And I will add this.
He did try to hand it back, though, to be fair.
And he still can. That's the whole point. I think back to that press conference on the 19th of November 2020. I wish it started like this. I wish a medal was put on the table and we were told that accountability starts at the top. We all would have taken a deep breath and said that that is an act of leadership. That act can still happen today. He can do it today. He can do it tomorrow.
Practically speaking, how do you think that the ADF begins, or the sort of very difficult task of rebuilding trust in the Special Forces and also the chain of command?
A lot of that has happened. And if you were to go to the key combat regiments of SAS in Perth or Commandos in Sydney, very few people were involved in the special operations tours in Afghanistan. They're quite new, and some of them were in primary school, when a lot of this started. So they have had that cultural shift. My understanding is that on selection courses, that they assess as much for ethics and character as they do for all the normal attributes. So I think a lot of change has happened, but we must also never forget that they are on very short notice to move, to put themselves in danger for us, and that is the priority. So we need to draw a line under this and say that as a democracy we hold ourselves to account, no one's above it, but then be ready to fight the next fight.
And did you have any thoughts about the timing of this announcement today? Some veterans had been upset at the fact that it was announced on the week that we've also seen the response to the Royal Commission into veteran suicides.
That didn't personally bother me, but a bit of others have felt that. I'm more than happy to hear them out. I don't see that link, but it's a valid point to raise.
A deal on aged care today between the government and the coalition. The people that will pay the most extra are self-funded retirees. Some Liberal MPs spoke out against that within party room. Do you have any concerns around that deal?
As you know, we can't speak about party room. It's like Fight Club. And
no, but you can tell
me. It really is like Fight Club. It really is like
You're
Fight
a backbencher. The Liberals can speak out.
Yes, we have enormous freedom with no consequences ever. No
sounded like Fight Club.
No one's watching.
It sounded like Fight Club today,
right.
by the sounds of it.
But can I say this? This is one of those times when we need to look over the horizon. And several times, including on this show, I've referenced the intergenerational report. It says that for Commonwealth government spending, at the moment it's $25,000 per person. In 2063, with no improvements in productivity, it'll be $40,000. And there's 5 key line items: health, aged care, NDIS, defence and interest on debt. And so we are having this demographic challenge where we need to make sure that the system is sustainable. But above all else, we should make sure that we're providing a dignified retirement for Australians who deserve it.
Keith Wolahan, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.